Imagine the year is 1500. European ships are anchoring off the coast of West Africa. The Portuguese have been trading here for decades. Gold, spices, ivory. But something is about to change. What if it never did? What if the transatlantic slave trade simply never happened? No chains, no middle passage, no plantations built on forced labor. The world you are about to enter looks nothing like the one you know. First, the facts. The transatlantic slave trade ran from roughly 1500 to 1900. An estimated 12.5 million Africans were forcibly taken from their homelands. About 10.7 million survived the brutal ocean crossing known as the Middle Passage. They were shipped to the Caribbean, North America, and South America. This was one of the largest forced migrations in human history. It touched almost every corner of the world. So, removing it does not just change one thing, it changes everything. Let us start in Africa. The slave trade devastated West and Central African societies. Scholars estimate that between 1500 and 1900, Africa lost tens of millions of people, not just to the ships, but to the wars, raids, and social collapse the trade deliberately encouraged. Without it, those people stay home. Population grows, trade expands. The sophisticated networks connecting West Africa to North Africa and the Mediterranean get stronger, not weaker. Here's the part most people do not know. Africa in 1500 was not a continent of isolated villages. The Songhai Empire was at its peak. Timbuktu was one of the wealthiest and most educated cities on Earth. The University of Sankore had thousands of students and hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. Without centuries of extraction and destabilization, West Africa follows its own development path. The conditions for growth were already there. Now, let's cross the Atlantic. Without enslaved African labor, who builds the New World? European colonizers had already tried using indigenous peoples, but disease had wiped out up to 90% of some native populations. Indigenous labor could not sustain large-scale plantation agriculture. So, without African enslaved labor, the plantation system collapses before it begins. Massive sugar, tobacco, cotton, and rice never develop at scale. The Caribbean islands that made European investors extraordinarily wealthy become far less significant. That has enormous consequences. Britain, France, Spain, and Portugal built significant portions of their 18th century wealth on slave-produced goods. Without that engine, European industrialization slows or takes a completely different path. Some historians argue that capital from Caribbean sugar plantations directly funded the British Industrial Revolution. Remove that capital pipeline, and the entire global timeline of technology shifts. Now, here's where it gets personal. The United States, as we know it, does not exist without the slave trade. The American South built its entire economy on enslaved labor. By the 1800s, cotton was the single most valuable American export. Enslaved people were, in economic terms, worth more than all the railroads and factories in the country combined. Without that foundation, the Southern states hold far less economic and political power. The Missouri Compromise, the 3/5 Clause in the Constitution, the Civil War, none of those happened the same way. America still forms, but it's a fundamentally different country. What about the people themselves? Around 40 million people alive today descend from Africans brought to the Americas by force. African-American culture, its music, language, food, and art has shaped global culture in ways that are difficult to overstate. Jazz, blues, rock and roll, hip-hop, these did not just come from African Americans, they came from the specific experience of surviving oppression. In this alternate world, those cultural forms do not exist. But African influence on the world does not disappear. It arrives on African terms, through trade, diplomacy, and migration, not through chains. Now let's zoom all the way out. Without the slave trade, the racial hierarchies that define the modern world never calcify in the same way. The concept of race as we understand it today was largely invented to justify slavery. Legal systems, scientific theories, and religious arguments were all built to explain why some people could be owned. Remove the need for that justification, and those ideas never take root with the same force. The global wealth gap between descendants of colonizers and descendants of the colonized looks dramatically different. So, would the world be better? In many measurable ways, yes. Fewer people suffer unspeakable cruelty. Africa keeps its people and its momentum. The Americas develop differently, perhaps more slowly, but more equitably. But it would not be a perfect world. European colonialism existed before the slave trade and ran alongside it. Indigenous peoples still face conquest. The hunger for power and resources does not disappear because one atrocity is removed. History is not a simple equation. But here's the most important thing to take away. The transatlantic slave trade was not inevitable. It was a choice. Thousands of individual choices made by rulers, merchants, and colonizers over 4 centuries. Every choice that built it could have been made differently. History is not running on autopilot. It's made by people, and it can be reshaped by people too. If this kind of alternate history is your thing, the next video goes even deeper. What if the Mongol Empire never fell? That one will hit just as hard. Subscribe so you don't miss it.